So, thank you everyone for coming, and thank you, Bob, for coming out all the way out here across
And Eric and Tomas, yeah.
great lands. And thank you, both of you, for not only coming out here, but all the attention and care you put into working with people today. That was, I think, people really felt that, and really had a lot of gratitude for that. So thank you. This is fun for me because I knew Bob when I was, I think probably 19 or 20 years old, so many years ago. So it's really fun to reconnect, a part of my distant past with the present. So thank you, guys.
She needs to sit down. She's going to sit with you tomorrow.
But I think, I hope the biggest reveal isn't what a fabulous dinner we all had, because that was just fantastic. So
everything's going to be a bummer from then on.
But that was really great. So I think that really set the tone. I think, maybe I'll just, start with just a couple just offbeat questions before we get into the full theory.
Okay, before that, I've worked with a lot of different kinds of people, which I really love, because I become, I get to learn. I become stuff they learned, and I love that. And so this woman was is a classical violinist, University of Texas in Austin. And the person that lives across from Eric in the building that I live in also is one of the world's best flute repairists. And so people come from all over the world, like this Chinese person shows up at the door and goes like, awesome. And they give him the flute, and then Finley goes, go downstairs and meet Bob. You want to meet Bob? And they come downstairs and I look at their body and be like, that elbow pain you have? Oh yeah, oh, terrible pain. So then what we can do is, I'll be like, let me show you how to stretch so you can get rid of that problem. Right? But then he sends down this woman, Marian Kajikian, and Marian's quite psychological as a person. And so I said, can we go back upstairs and listen to your play? And so she starts playing and she plays for a little while and I interrupt her, which is really the wrong thing, of course. And I said, oh, Marian, sorry, it's too narcissistic. Could you allow your attention to be on this instead of that? And she goes, okay. And then she changes the way she plays. And Finley goes, Marianne, it's a total new level for you. That's unbelievable. And then she keeps playing. I go, excuse me. And she goes, what? I was like, oh God. Don't worry, I'll never interrupt you again. Marianne, it's way too passive aggressive. Could we do this instead? Could you allow this to happen? And then she plays it again and Finley goes, oh my God, Marianne, it upgraded again. It's a completely different level. I've never heard you play like that. And this is the song that I taught her how to play. It only lasts 3 minutes. I'm technically challenged, obviously.
It's not. No, I'm all done.
Louder? It's okay. nice to have it in this room. Right?
So I'm not gonna ask a question.
Oh, you're going to ask a question?
Yeah. So you've talked about moments like that where like it was just perfect. Something great just happened, moments like that. Can you tell us, you know, is that, and that you've been really motivated and moved by moments where you've worked with, I guess, clients or whatever. What were some of the early moments that were really moving to you?
When I was a little kid, one of the things I realized was that I really liked feeling smart in a particular way. And I saw that other people were smart in other ways. And I could see that some people gave up their smartness in order to be socially accepted. And I was like, I have no interest in doing that. I mean, I wouldn't even know how to be social, much less do it, much less give it up. And I realized a lot of people had given up their genius part in order to deal with social mores or things like that. So that's what it reminds me of. So when I meet people, when I met Marion, I was like, oh, wow, that's really... To be with her, it's like R2-D2 where you plug in and then you get to download the hard drive information. When in the stretching that we do, it gives us compathy so that after you come out of a stretch, if we put you in a stretch, Doug, then what happens is that your perception might change of the world, besides physical feelings of your body, not to be discounted any of those, or physiological or other things. But the way you're now perceiving the world, it starts happening to me. And so that's what it's like for me to be with the best musician in the world, or one of the best, or the best swimmer in the world, or the best windsurfer, or the best academic for genomic researchers. I kind of like that part. I'm comfortable in those situations with people like that. And that's the part I like. And so that's why my book's called The 16 Geniuses. Did that answer that?
Yeah, and I mean, I've seen you be quite moved by people who aren't the best in the world or whatever. They're, you know, kind of regular people, but you pull some of that out of people and then sort of recognize when a truth or a fact is purely leaving their mouth.
So for example, when I go to Whole Foods in the morning in Boston, and I like to buy food in the morning so it's fresh, and there's a woman there that's usually the cashier there. She's a student. There's a lot. Boston should be called the city of youth because there's more universities everywhere. So here she is, a student. She's working there. She's in a really bad mood. No problem. I'm always in a bad mood. So I look and I go, you know, one of the reasons that I really like coming to Whole Foods in the morning when I get to see you is because you always make my day. You always affect my mood and make me feel really worthy. She goes, oh my God, you made my day. Stuff like that. That's what I know how to do. And if I malfunction, I can do the opposite and make the person feel terrible. So it works both directions, you know. The thing that the personality stuff has brought me the most into is that a lot of people don't really like the negatives. They don't like their angers, they don't like their fears, they don't like their anxieties, they don't like their frights. But I know that plants grow out of compost. We work with regenerative farmers. We know that a flower doesn't grow out of a flower, it grows out of the negatives. So I don't mind the person having their negatives. And I usually find them kind of mild. I was working with a guy in LA, and he had a phone call to make with somebody, and the guy owed him $100 million. And he was really kind of pissed at the guy, but he was scared to death at the same time. And I watched him as he went into the deepest fears. I mean, he was like shaking with fear. And then he starts trembling with anger. And these two things are happening, like he's shifting between the two things. And he goes, Ralph, I would really appreciate it if you just pay us the $100 million. And then he gives a little time for the guy to think and goes, we don't want to do the legal thing, so just send me a check, okay? Gets off the phone. So I kind of, or if we train an Olympian, I like the gold. I like to work with people that know how to do that, you know? I like them to manifest their amazingness, right? But when you do, you let them know that being number one comes out of a borderline state. And so feeling completely worthless is where that Olympic gold comes from. And so when I meet an athlete, I'm like, I'm glad you developed these things. The parts that aren't developed is where the gold is. Stop trying to make the parts that are good, good. Get a lot of help from other people and fix the parts that don't work. And that's how you get the gold. And then when they stand on the podium, they can handle the borderline feelings that show up. So after I did this with a woman athlete, she was 33, and we helped to have a body of a 16-year-old by regenerating her tissue. The guy that won the 50-meter freestyle at the event went total borderline. But because I was known for affecting swimmers, the University of California, Berkeley gave me a contract to work with all the swimmers. And so I met the kid and I looked at the coach and I said, could I have 5 minutes with him? Can you make him spend 5 minutes with me? And he goes, I can. And so I went up on the roof and I said, look, you're in a total borderline state. This is really dangerous. He goes, yeah, I don't care. I get up in the morning and I cross the street and I don't care if I get run over by a car. And I go, look, dude, the muscle group associated with the front of your belly here, if we stretch that muscle group, we can bring you into the ecstatic state and out of the borderline state. He goes, I'm not interested. I was like, you don't have to be interested. All you have to do is let me stretch the muscle. And he goes, fuck you. And it never happened, right? And then for 12 years, he went total borderline, which is really dangerous. So,
What do you mean by borderline?
What do I mean by borderline?
Yeah.
In terms of myself?
Sure.
Cool. So, when I first started stretching, and I told you, people have heard the story, like, you know, I was stretching and then my biomechanics got a lot better, which I was really happy about. And then I was stretching my lateral hamstring, and my lateral hamstring made me aware of my bladder. So I didn't know muscles were associated with organs. And then I was stretching muscle groups down the front center of my body, and I went outside and everybody was attracted to me. They're not attracted to me in Boston. They're attracted to me in Costa Rica. I go at least twice a year. So they think if you put Brad Pitt here and Mel Gibson here, this is what they like. It's a great feeling. So if you want to be really felt attracted to, we can tell you the country to go to where they think you're the best looking thing that ever hit the planet. So I ran back to my house and I opened up the Chinese medicine book because I was refusing to learn, you know, too arrogant and closed-minded. And it said it was sexual meridian. They called it conception vessel because they're a little uptight. And I was like, oh my God, I'm being sexy. You can tell that is not what I'm normally doing. I mean, Tomas can pull that over better and Eric, but I'm not just doing that. So I was like, oh God, these are affecting me psychologically. So then I stayed in the same pose all day for a month and just wrote down what happened. See, because I was desperate to recover from my automobile accident. And then it would start to identify my personality developing. And then 35 years later, I woke up in the morning and I called my computer Hal, you know, from 2001 Space Odyssey. And I go, hey, Hal, I'm having a feeling, but I don't know what it is. And he goes, why don't you have it a little longer? I go, Hal, you're such a bitch. Can't you just tell me? And he goes, just a little longer, Bob. And I like, okay. And then I go, okay, Hal, what is it? What's the feeling? And he goes, Bob, you're not afraid when you don't know something because you're not afraid of not knowing. And so that kind of fear you can handle. But you go down a back alley at 2 o'clock in the morning and you're not afraid. You're an idiot. You're supposed to be frightened. And I said, oh, fright? I never identified fright yet. And so the moment I have the word, because my type is very sensitive to words, I started processing fright. Because fear you process inside, and I'm kind of an inside person. And so all of a sudden when I knew it was fright, the word locked me in and my attention went outside and I started looking at my clothes and everything in my bedroom. And I said, hey, Hal, when I process fright, I start to come out of fright and transmute it into peacefulness. And he goes, I get upset when I talk about it. And then he goes, Hal goes, I have something very important to tell you. And I was like, okay, Hal, you bitch, what is it? And he goes, you remember that after your accident, you took a walk in the morning after that and you landed yourself in a churchyard and there's a statue of JC and you looked at JC and said, hey, JC, let's get one thing correct here. I have no interest whatsoever in whatever has happened. I'm missing something from my view and I don't like the view I have now. I want whatever was missing. And it took me 35 years to figure it out. And Hal said, you were disconnected from your life and now you're connected to your life again. I was like, It's exactly what I was looking for. I was disconnected from my life. Because see, when people have different traumas, they get disconnected from different things. And then Hal goes, okay, so get up and start singing and dancing. And I said, oh no, Hal, you don't understand. I'm the world's authority on fascial material and flexibility and genetic personality types. And he goes, I'm well aware of what you've spent some time doing. You can use that to become a better dancer and singer. Get out of the bed. Because, I perform with Mickey Rooney and dance, the blah, blah, all the blah, blah. And so I got up, and then for 3 years, I worked on that every day, singing. Now, it just so happens my living room is an Oval Office that was donated to the Boston Symphony before the building was renovated. And all the best classical musicians in the world practice in my living room, which is now my living room. And so you can imagine when you walk in and the notes are everywhere. You're just being infused by the greatest players in the world, classical players in the world. And that's where I taught myself how to sing. So I mastered singing, but I didn't finish with the dancing. That was more complicated for me. Okay, so does that answer the question?
Well, it begs the question, we're gonna hear a song.
I'm sorry?
It begs the question, we're gonna hear a song?
Oh, definitely not. And, okay, so can we look at this just for a second? So if you turn to page 20, now you know that all the personality information, I didn't think it up. It actually came out of the physical stretching. So you can see the way the lioness stretches is that they reach forward and then they go like that. Well, that's the muscle contracting when you stretch, right? So we bought this, and by the way, you know where the photograph comes from? Lynn Davis Studios in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I bought them for use of that picture of the lioness stretching years ago. And then you can see next to it is a diagram that was created in, this is very old, 1991, where I hired a woman, a friend of mine, and I said to her, look, I have, all these different stretches and they're associated with organs and personality information. Let's create a chart for that. So you can see there's 4 physical types and 4 thinking types and 4 emotional types and 4 spiritual types. And each one is associated with an organ and a yoga pose. There's a lot of different poses. And in this chart, I think they just have the high trait, right? No, it's got the high trait. So if a person, say, in the spiritual world is associated with the large intestine, then perfection is a high trait of their type. I have 40 of those, 40 of those for each type. It's just an example of one of the high traits. And the downside is a DSM personality disorder. But the DSM only, I think, has 8 now, and I have 16.
What do you mean by a high trait?
A high trait is a different form of enlightenment. Americans are very emotional and very into bliss as a personality, but they're balanced by enlightenment, where they're lit up on the inside. Because Americans are very lit up on the outside. I consider that equivalent. But the Buddhists are lit up on the inside, and so that's called enlightenment, instead of being lit up on the outside. But there's actually, America doesn't realize, there's 16 versions of that enlightenment. So in other words, in terms of your own type, tell us your name again.
Nicole.
Nicole. Nicole's type, I think, is the center. One of the high traits of enlightenment is delight. Are you aware that you find life delightful, or people delightful, or that they find you delightful?
Yeah.
It's a high trait. I don't have that. I find people a complete pain in the ass. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm really glad that you got the, it's not true, I have the high. So that's delight, right?
Yeah.
But my type has a very different sense of enlightenment than that. I see people as very high functioning humans. Like when I look at them, I don't understand the part that doesn't work because I'm seeing the part that's actually the real person. And I'm wondering, like, how did they get entangled with all that other stuff? So see, I see the high part of the person that way. But Tomas, do you know what it is when you look at people or what you have as a high trait?
I first thought of a down trait, which will be, I see all the entanglement and I can't see the person. I can see how they're pure.
So his type is the center for purity. Right? And he balances me, except it's the wrong gender. Inside of each person is an unconscious type, and the unconscious type is not an unknown part of their own conscious type. It's actually another type. So inside of me is a woman that's Tomas or Eric's type. The unconscious is the other gender. So we can relate to both genders, right? I already know, but I don't know what you know about it.
You see it or you feel it? Or is it,
Well,
they're both?
it's actually been like my body, but also the side.
Energetically aware, not visual.
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask a question.
Wait a minute, just a second. And so, do you know what one of your high traits of enlightenment are for your type? You means I'll whisper to you, then you can tell
Trust.
people. No, try something, anything. What do you have that's kind of actually extraordinary and superhuman for most people that other people aren't doing?
Well, I mean, you're talking about thinking? I'm not sure what you mean.
I think people can trust you in a way they don't trust most people.
Yeah.
Isn't that true? They have, I know, I'm just kidding. See, I always have to do, I have fun by giving people a hard time. If you really, I don't know how to have fun, so that's my only way of doing it. So different people have different things. So that's what I meant by the high traits of the type. And in Western psychology, unfortunately, please understand that when Jung wrote his book on personality types, he concluded that at the present time there was no physical basis for personality types. I am not trained in psychology. I took a couple courses. I was not trained in Chinese medicine. When I realized that a meridian muscle group was associated with an organ, I went over to the Chinese medicine school, and there was a woman in the bookstore, and I said to her, hey, I would like to go watch a class here. And she said, oh, what time's your appointment? And I said, oh, I don't have an appointment. She goes, oh, no, you have to create an appointment. I said, oh, that's okay. Can I go to the bathroom? Can you show me where the bathroom is? And see, because I come from a background where you just make it happen no matter what. And so then I walked down the hallway, and then I just watched a class. And so when I went back, and I could tell I didn't want to learn in the Chinese medicine school. And so I'm an autodidact. I spent 4 years studying at the Harvard Medical Library myself, right? I mean, I taught math at UMass to 4,000 students and to Williams College, to the elite population in the United States. But I'm an autodidact. I like to be taught. I like to teach myself. I like learning from everybody else. But so I looked at her and I said, are these the books they use for the 3-year certification in Chinese medicine? And she said, yes. And I said, well, I rollerbladed over here, so could you call me a cab and I'll take one of all the books? And she goes, very funny. I said, no, here's my card. I really want. So I bought all the books for the 3-year certification, and then I started devouring the database, to find out what they knew about Chinese medicine, to compare what I knew about it. I needed to know what they knew compared to what I knew. Because when I went back to school at the University of Maryland to post undergraduate courses to find out what people knew about biomechanical analysis of human motion and stuff, when I took the courses, I knew more than professors. And they were very good. They didn't mind me not knowing more than they did. They let me use their lab for research. It was very amazing. And when I went to UMass, I went to the #1 person for biomechanical analysis of human motion, Stan Plaganoff. We got along amazing. He was a fabulous person. And so that's what it was like for me. I would always go places and then kind of generate it myself. And then they hired me full-time to teach mathematics because I was having a ball. So just to digress on that. So if I was teaching a math class and I looked at you, Nicole, and you looked confused about the problem, I would be up there, and the problem would be on the board written out, and then I'd see you and you'd be like this. I wasn't confused about the problem, but I could see you were. And so I'd be like, I would start feeling the way you were feeling, and then I'd start acting it out. So I might run around the room and take off my clothes or have a temper tantrum or just get really tense or get really, whatever the problem was. And if I became the way you were, I could think the way you were thinking. And then it'd be like, Nicole, are you thinking this about this problem? And you'd say yes, and I'd go like, no, Nicole, it's like this. And you'd go, bing. And then in the auditorium you'd hear, bing, 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 bing. And then I'd look at another person, I'd be like, oh no, this problem's driving you crazy. You feel terrible about this. I feel worse than you do. I'm starting to have indigestion. Oh, this is really a problem for me. Does anybody have anything for me? And I would act out the whole thing until I could think the way you were. And then when I did, I said, are you thinking about it this way? And you did. So we outscored the entire university for all the exams. Because we, could be empathetic with people. So anyhow,
So let me just validate that. My daughter just got a job as a math teacher,
okay, what level?
6th grade.
Okay.
And I remember about, it 6 months ago, or maybe a little more than that, 9 months ago, she called me, she was talking to Marinelle and I, and she said, you know, I love teaching math. And I said, why? Because she said you find out the most about the student, about their mind, by how they approach the math problem. You know, 5th grade, what? You know, and, you know, so it's obviously, it's an amazing thing how people react to an objective problem, allowing you to an insight into their soul, their mind.
I was much more interested in the person than the math problem.
Right. And so she is.
I mean, I like math problems. I mean, I like that. Anyhow. Okay, so then if you turn the page.
And am I right that one of your prime students thinks of the personality, when she articulated this to me, as different cognitive styles? Like that's one interpretation.
Oh, that's the understatement.
Right.
Yeah, they have very different types of intelligence. 16 kinds of intelligence. But anyhow, the next page you can see a picture of what fascia looks like when it's healthy. And when it's traumatized, that's what it turns into. So in the beginning phase, you can see it's a very translucent and kind of harmonious look. And then when it's traumatized, it gets very chaotic in its design. And so when we stretch you, or when you're stretching yourself, and you contract the muscle and lengthen the muscle while it's being contracted, you turn the bottom picture into the top picture. And then that traumatized tissue goes into your bloodstream, and it's got to be removed by your body. It's a toxin. The fascial material that surrounds, inserts into, or impregnates all the tissues in the body, that when it's damaged, and my friend Sharif at Harvard, as a father that's dying of genetic degenerative muscular diseases, and when he worked with frogs in the lab, he found that when the frog contracted, that the frog would contract the muscle when he stretched, and that enzymes are released to cause transfiguration of the fascia, or reconstitution back into a normal state, and regeneration of all the other tissues. So you take that tissue on the bottom and it turns into the top, except with the humans in particular, because we're not in the animal kingdom. It's obvious, right? We're in a different kingdom. We have perspective. Like the fish don't know they're in the ocean, but we know we're in the room. See what I mean? We have a different brain. In Western medicine still, they still think there's only 3 brains. They call the whole top of the brain a third brain. When the back of the brain, the top of the back of the brain is a perspective brain. It's a different brain. And only the humans have that. The animals don't have that. And we're kind of a compilation, in my understanding, of all the other parts. So when you look at a cow, you're like, yeah, I got part cow. You know, and when you look at a rock, you're like, yeah, I'm part rock. And, you know, we're kind of all the different things. So we're here to try to protect everything, I think. You know, because we're kind of built with all of them. But anyhow, so that's what the fascial material looks like. So if you do that, then what ends up happening at the very beginning, on our new webpage that was released in November, 16geniuses.com, anybody can be typed for $10. And you just send in a little teeny video, and we just ask a couple questions. It's like 20 seconds. And then we send you your genetic type. Or 43 pages, depends if you subscribe or not. You know, that kind of internet bullshit. So then on the second page, that tells you that when the sperm and egg have union, the genetic type is formed. Do you know there's a twins conference in Twinsburg, Ohio? So every year, thousands and thousands of identical and fraternal twins show up in Twinsburg, Ohio. And we did a research presentation to them. And when the twins would come in, we would say to them, you, Harold, you and Jeffrey are like this, right? And they're like, how do you know that? And I go, because we know that identical twins are the same type, and we know what genetic type you are. They're like, that's unbelievable. And then some people would come in the tent and be like, hey, Jeff, I'm going to say something that might be very disturbing. It's okay, Bob. And I said, I think you and your brother David are not identical twins. Thank God somebody's telling us. because aren't you like this, Jeff? And isn't David like this? And he goes, yes. And I said, well, you're half identical. There's a weird case where the sperm divides before the sperms get it, and you get two different types of people.
Next.
It's like a weird phenomenon, right? But then we wanted them to know that if you're an identical twin, you spend so much time with your own type, and the types have the same language. So if we put 10 people in the room, and we asked Nicole and them a question, Nicole, you would start and they would finish using the same words. It's terrible. You'd be like, oh my God, that's exactly what I was thinking. But they're used to doing that with each other, and everybody else is kind of stupid, including the parents. So I said, hey, look, you're missing out. There are millions of people in the world that are the same type as you. So stop thinking your twin is the only person that can do this with you. There's a lot of people in the world that can be with you. The parents were like, oh, God. But we didn't come here just for that. We came here for dating. They're like, dating? Do you know about twins and dating? Really complicated if you're a twin and dating. Because if Joe and I were identical twins, we'd go date somebody and then we'd come on and be like, I can't talk to the person about what's going on, blah, 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 about the person I was dating. And he'd be like, blah, 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 blah. And 7 years later, they realize they can actually talk to the person they're dating. It's really complicated. They're too used to their own language. I said, there's a type that's better to talk to you than your own twin. Ooh. They're like, that's not possible. I'm like, I know. I never would have thought so either. But this type, don't you like it when people are like this? And they're like, I do like that. That's the balancing type that I talked about inside. So inside of a person is a balancing type that actually is all the ways. So you can see that Eric and Tomas are quite peaceful. And you don't necessarily think that about me when you first meet me. I'm much more, I don't have a problem with conflict and stuff. I'm like, oh, really? A little conflict? Oh, really? Good, now we can get something done. You know what I mean? They don't do it that way, right? And they're very communicative, where I'm very self-expressive, right? So they're very careful about talking to people, and I'm usually not very careful. I mean, I try to be the way they're being. But you can see these are this is a very different way of being. Okay.
So how do you guys, how do you guys feel the balancing nature of him?
I think there's times where you have to take a stance.
Say it again, Tom.
I think there's times where you have to take a stance.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for them, hopefully, it is to back off when it's not necessary. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're good at de-escalating a situation that is escalated too high, and there's situations where you have to escalate it. You gotta make something happen, and yeah, I get to experience in real time what a human being who can naturally do that, and then I get to have both sides for myself.
So feeling energized, sort of, that's not quite the right word, escalating, give us some...
This reminds me of a story, when Bob was trying to get me into co-op building, my bank had frozen my funds, and I needed to get a cashier's check for about 20 grand to get into this building, and I could not get them to do it. And Bob's like, give me the phone. And how within 5 minutes, the funds were there. They're like, I can't do anything, sir. I can't do anything. Like, they're going to be stuck for a week. In 10 minutes, Bob, escalating the situation, got me my funds, and
But then when I escalate a situation that really should be done in the opposite direction, Eric will come in and clean up the trouble afterwards. You know, Bob was really thinking about you, and he didn't really express that the way, he was really loving you, but it didn't come out the way, really, I thought he hated me. Oh no. If he didn't like you, he wouldn't even spend time with you, and then they repair the damage. See, that way.
Is that why there's two of them?
Oh, no, I have more. Yeah. Okay, so anyhow, the graphics are credit to E.E. Volver in Los Angeles, because when I first was creating, these are all graphics from my new book, released in the fall, hopefully. And so I would steal an image off of Google, and then I would say how I want the consciousness to increase in the image, how I need the image changed, and then she'd create it for me, back and forth would come. So credit goes to E. Volver for that. So then the next page says that the problem with psychology is that If you go into Western psychology like the DSM, there's personality disorders. So if somebody was analyzed as schizoid, they don't tell you that the high side is enlightenment. So getting rid of schizoid doesn't develop enlightenment. So they don't even know that. So in other words, when somebody comes to me and they're addicted, we know it's associated with my type, and this muscle group down the outside of the leg comes up around the mouth. And if they're particularly addicted, they have more scar tissue in that muscle than normal. If you work with as many people as I work with, you can tell when you work with people's tissue which psychological problems they have based on where the dense fascian scar tissue is in their body. And so if you remove that, here's addiction, here's sobriety, here's non-addiction, here's non-sobriety. It's a spectrum. So the person that's addicted doesn't know what sobriety is. They might know something about not being addicted, but sobriety, people that have sobriety, they like to self-express. They like to leave their windows down and sing to other people. They like quality items. They buy cashmere blankets, not LL Bean blankets. They like things that work and can't stand things that don't work. You know, like when you go to somebody's house and the faucet in the bathroom hurts your hand when you turn the fucking faucet. We don't like that. We like something that's really comfortable. So they don't have any of the sobriety issues. And then a whole layer underneath of that is the balancing type, which is associated with martyrdom or temperance. And so what happens, there's non-martyrdom and non-temperance and temperance. And so if you really want to solve the person's problem that has addiction, it means that they're not high in their life. They're not feeling connected to their life. You can't talk them out of it. If you have a body part that's developed, you could talk them through it. But usually when you want to change behavior, you got to change the body to give them a foundation for the thinking, the emotional and spiritual part of them. Just telling them is probably not going to work. So if you take that tissue out here, then you have to go after the balancing muscle group on the other side of the body. And then they learn how to be temperate or how to have fun and how to be very communicative and empathetic, which is what the addicted person doesn't have.
Yeah.
And so I don't really mind. So if somebody comes to me and they're like, sadistic is crazy, I'm like, entertaining. Because see, sadistic to me is nothing compared to genocide. So we have a whole gamut of different emotions. So somebody's like, I'm really angry. I'm like, really? What kind? What kind do you do? And they're like, when I get angry, I just blow up like that. It's, oh, you like blow off the steam and then everybody's charred around you, but you feel a little better. They're like, yeah, I go, no, you don't. I said, oh, you don't shoot people or, oh no, I don't do that. I'm like, oh, you don't destroy property? They're like, oh no. I'm like, you don't do genocide? They're like, oh, it's pretty mild. I think we can deal with it. Not a problem.
So one of the criticisms of the Enneagram theory was, that's all negative and it doesn't really show you where to go.
That's true.
And do you want to talk a little bit about that, about what you've experienced with people integrating and some of the other types of personalities or whatever?
So I don't know if you know this, but Josiah Child was the person that popularized what he called the Enneagram, which was 9 personality types. And he brought a bunch of psychologists from California down to Arica, Chile. Arica is an interesting name because it's America with the me taken out. So he took the narcissism out of America and called it Arica. It just happened to be called Arica, but anyhow. And so it was an oral tradition. So when the people came back, they weren't supposed to tell anybody. They could only do it verbally. Nothing could be written down. And Claudio Naranjo took the information and taught it to Helen Palmer, and Helen Palmer wrote it in a book. And Oscar sued her, and in court they asked Oscar where he got the information, and he should have said he originated the information. And instead he said he learned it from Archangel Gabriel, and so he lost the case. Bad lawyer. But anyhow, so then after that everybody started producing Enneagram books, and in Oscar's tradition, he was the only person that typed people. Nobody else was allowed to type. I have been typing people since 1989. So if you go to me with the grocery store or shopping or anywhere I go, you can ask me and I can tell you what type of person I am. But that's not teaching people how to type. I'm just giving examples of people. So I don't know anybody that I've ever met that's good at typing. They don't know how to do it yet. And they doubt that I know how to do it. No problem. So it's only when science shows up and facial recognition or voice recognition's AI does it, then they'll believe the type, and they're not going to believe Bob Cooley. That's not a problem. Yeah. I mean, I doubt it more than anybody else, so help yourself. Yeah.
So what about integration? I mean, that's something that...
So in terms of the Enneagram, and the problem with Western psychology is that if you're depressed, they don't tell you that if you have the tools to transmute depression, it turns into creativity. But you need the muscle groups on the back of your shoulder to work really well so that you actually keep your attention outside. See, when people get depressed, they get locked up inside and start magnifying their anxiety. But if you stretch out the muscle groups on the back of their shoulder, when they're depressed, their attention will start to go outside and they'll start transmuting the depression and turn it into a creative object. That's how that works. And that's true of depression or sadistic behavior or antisocial behavior or depersonalization or whatever the person, whatever they got snagged on. So there's a way to transmute the negatives all into the positive. Joe's pressing the concept. If everybody is born a particular type, the moment they're born one of 16 types. You can't change the type. It's a genetic lock-in. But it does tell you how you could facilitate their growth. And one of the things that happens is that when my type's born, I'm born a thinking type. But then the question is, how and in what order do I become more developed physically, emotionally, or spiritually? And for my type, or people my type, after being mentally developed enough, analytically developed enough, I then go after developing my body. That's the next order of business for me. And after that's developed enough, I go after, I'm curious too. I'm curious. I'm curious.
It's going.
Is it going?
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. And then after I develop physically enough, then my body starts developing emotionally. And after I'm emotionally or socially developed enough, it starts to go into being spiritual in their particular way of spirituality. So each type, if you know that as a child, you'll know what type, we type people the moment they're born. And so if you know that, you can facilitate their initial way of being, and then also facilitate environments and situations and people so they integrate into the other parts of themselves. I call that integration. But let's look at this for a second. So anyhow, that's a positive psychology. And then if you turn to the next page, on page 4, I created icons for each one of the types. So you can see for the gallbladder type, it's a tree. Well, the high trait of that type is devotion. And devotion is a lot like a root, the roots in a tree, right? And if you do a gallbladder stretch on the side of your leg, you look at green. Your attention goes to green. And then there's a light and a darker color of green that symbolizes the high and low trait of the type. And the color on the outside is their unconscious type, which is the next type. So the unconscious for the gallbladder type of devotion is a type associated with freedom. And see, that's what the icons are all about. I had really fun making the icons. You'll see it on everybody's t-shirt, yeah. And then the concept of balancing types means there's 4 parts of a person, above and below, conscious part and unconscious part. I'm just going to run through these, and then we can find out what people really want to know about. And then I told you we did a research for identical twins. Not this August, but next August we have another research tent, and we're taking, the twins come into a research vehicle, a 45-foot tractor trailer, and we take 4 drops of blood, and we're comparing the nutritional profile of identical twins to people that are the same type. And that becomes the book Diet for the Types. Because when you eat an orange and I eat an orange, we don't get the same thing out of it. And you might need a pear and I might need an orange. It'd be good to know genetically, not blood type, genetically what foods would be better and supplements for people. And then this shows you face recognition software. If the moment you're born with the capacity to develop high personality types, your face forms into those personality traits. Like if you analyze Joe's face with geometric analysis, you'll find out that he has more facial feature that are associated with trust, and I have more with sobriety. And then you can also find out what other parts of his personality develop. So that's facial recognition software. And voice recognition software allows you to do it through tone of voice. I'll show you. Watch this. I'm going to say a word, and after I say it, I'm going to count to 3, and after 3, can you both say the word? So I'm going to say the word apple, okay? And I'm going to count to 3. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3.
Apple.
Doug, I'm going to say apple. You're going to say apple again, but with Tomas. And I'm going to count to 3, and you both say apple, okay? Just so we can hear it. You're not the same type, so we want to see the difference. 1, 2, 3.
Apple.
See? So voice recognition software can put that together really pretty fast. Okay, just thought I'd let you know. Could you hear the difference? I'm asking.
Say what the difference again, I'm sorry.
Could you hear the difference between your apple and his apple?
In tonality or in?
In terms of voice production, in terms of the sound itself.
You can say.
I like no.
I think so. Yeah, I think he was very.
I like no or I don't know. I don't mind.
No, I think so. I think he was very forceful.
Okay, we want to do this. You ready? I'm going to do it again. Eric, your turn. You're going to say apple. I'm going to count to 3. Ready, Joe? 1, 2, 3.
Apple.
See, not the same. No. It's not only not the same. I mean, it's obvious you can hear the difference, right? The chef. The chef's name again?
Lucy.
Lucy? Oh, okay, great. You could hear it, right, Lucy? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Did you prefer theirs to his?
These two?
Yeah, did you prefer that sound to this sound?
I liked this sound. I liked this harmony.
You like
The
these?
two,
That's not what I'm asking. I'm sorry. That's called dissociating. I want to know whether or not you like the sound of their word of apple compared to his word of apple. I'm asking for a personal preference.
Yeah, I like Josiah's apple.
You like Joe's better?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for telling me. Okay.
Yeah.
So now I have a whole psychological analysis of her. And when I work with her, now I know what to work on. It's terrible. Anyhow, there's 4 groups of types. See, there's 4 groups of types. And underneath of them, you can see how they're equivalent, but how they perceive differently. So in the physical world, they're more present-minded. I'm not saying everybody doesn't have everything. In the more thinking world, they're more future-minded. In the emotional world, they're more past-aware, on page 9. And on the spiritual types, they're more relative. So that defines the 4 groups of types. And then the next page, you can't actually read it, but behind the I are 64 different words for people's looks. Because I have 4 different descriptions for people's looks, for each one of the different types. There's something really important to know about looks. I'm not an emotional type, and I'm not that emotionally developed that I present enough that way. But my type, and Tomas and Eric's type, we see beauty in things, and so we capture that beauty, and when people see the beauty in our face, it connects them to self-affirmation. Whereas in Joe's type, his facial expression which is persona, he's got a bigger persona, right? He connects people to self-worth. And so he gets to have the good looks, but the effect on other people is to connect them to self-worth. So both people benefit. That's how that works. So everybody knows good looks are good looks, but they don't know it's connecting people inside, and that's the real value, besides the value outside. That's good to know, right? Okay, then there's 4 kinds of intelligence. I think people know there's IQ and PQ and EQ. They might not know there's SQ. I didn't make these words up. There's different kinds of intelligence. And there's 16 brands of it, not just a group brand. I'm trying to show you the layers of information we have on types. And then the next page tells us about the integration, which we already talked about. And the next page is about cultures. Different cultures are different personality types. So I had really worked on the large intestine muscle groups before I went to Holland, and it's a large intestine culture. You know, they're perfectionistic and stuff. And when I was there, I could talk to them because I knew that way of being in myself. So I could be in a way that they could actually relate to. And I could also be in a way that they're attracted to. And it just naturally happens. I'm not forcing myself. I just know that being that way works for them, and that works for me, and so I end up being that way. Not a mental control. It's actually just educating me about the way I would want to really do it to get satisfaction. Then this is a knockout for most people. They can't tolerate this. There's 16 kinds of spirituality. And so if you want to make somebody a Taoist, all you got to do is stretch out their medial hamstring. And then they start seeing that everything comes out of nothing and that there's oneness in things. But if you want them to have a different brand of emotionality, like Christianity, then if you stretch out muscle groups on the back of the neck and shoulder, then they become a Christian. And the way that I know that is because, Doug, when I was stretching these muscle groups out, I went to a Jewish college. I'm not Jewish. I am. I got a lot of that. It was great. Great education, by the way, too. All of my friends, most of my friends are Jewish from that. And I was stretching out this muscle group on the outside of my leg, and I started feeling exactly like all my Jewish friends. And I was like, of course, the Bible doesn't grow out of the ground, and the Quran or none of those things. People write those things, and they kind of channel some of it, so to speak, but it doesn't grow. It's something humans make, so it comes out of us. So if you want to be a Jew, then just stretch the muscle groups on the outside of your legs, and you can become a really good Jew. And if you want to be a Hindu, that's a good one. If you do the back center of the leg, you can be a Hindu. That's a good one. So there's these different. If you want to be Confucianism, just do your lats and stretch out your lats. I have a digression. This will be a little difficult. We've stretched all kinds of different people, from the untouchables in India to the richest people in the world. And then one day, a fundraiser for the Templeton Foundation said to me, hey, we have somebody that would like to support your research. And I said, that'd be great. He goes, but he wants to remain anonymous. And I said, oh, that sounds really weird. And he goes, well, you just have to trust me on this one. I was like, I don't know. This doesn't sound good to me. And so I said, okay. So then I call Eric on the phone because he can protect me from all the greatest evils on the planet. And Eric and I show up at this apartment in New York. We walk in the door and you look up 3 steps and all the servants look like they're scared to death.
Like slaves.
Like slaves. It's a really scary environment.
New York apartment.
Yeah, up in the upper east side, upper west side or east side. And then there's a woman staying there. She's from Russia and she's perfect. And all she's doing is looking at my crotch. I was like, whoa. And I looked at her and I was like, no, not a good idea. No, I like you, but don't do that. You don't have to do that. I kept looking at her, right? Then we go in to talk to this guy, and I don't know who the person is. I mean, I've been a monk for a lot, I mean, I didn't even know who the vice president was. So, I mean, don't out me on the outside world. I mean, I just don't really know. And so we talked to this guy, and then after a while, I said, let's go upstairs on the 3rd floor and stretch. And he goes, how do you know my gym's on the 3rd floor? And I said, we're already on the 2nd floor, and we're on the 1st floor, and you're a billionaire, so you're not going to put your gym in the basement. So it's probably on the 3rd floor. Do you have other floors? I just thought there were 3 floors. He goes, it is on the 3rd floor. I'm like, let's go upstairs. So we go upstairs, and I said, let me show you what I figured out. And I started stretching his legs, and I said, your problem isn't in your legs. You don't have the dense fascial scar tissue in your leg. 10 minutes later, right? Can I check out your upper body? And I start to stretch out his upper body, and I was like, oh, you have incredible scar tissue in your lateral, in your lats, on the side of your body. I said, you know what that's associated with psychologically? And he goes, we're done. I said, oh, okay. And we left, and then Eric calls me the next morning and goes, do you know who that was? And I said, no, I have no idea. He goes, that was Jeffrey Epstein. And if you create scar tissue in the muscle groups on your lat, it creates child trafficking or inappropriate attraction to children, inability to handle your intimacy feelings towards children. So we've been with all kinds of people this way. It's what's happening that way. Just so I'll let you know how that works. Yeah, we've been around the block, Okay, and then, remember you told me that you didn't want people to be put in a box by knowing their type? And I said, well, a giraffe and an elephant need different food, and an azalea and a pineapple tree needs different food, and you and me have different names so that we get fed different stuff. So it's not a box, actually. It's just allowing you to point to the person so you go like, oh my God, that's a giraffe. Don't feed him what you would a raccoon. See, it really helps you to know. It's not boxing them. It's just getting you to point to what the thing is. So see, that's the view from getting out of the box. So if you think you're in a box, you get to look out. But the real thing is that you're in a fishbowl and you've boxed yourself and you get to get out and be free like the other people.
So, I mean, let's say like one of the things, the flip, is that if you have a sense of your path being your path, that feels very reinforcing. How you're different than other people. Like your path has an individuality to it.
Yeah, nobody's the same. I mean, one of the weird things about types is that if we put 10 people in the room that are the same type, and we had 10 other people over there, you'd see how similar they looked, and you'd how similar the other ones looked, and then you'd start to see how different they looked. In other words, I see people more different than most people see because I see types. So I've met at least 150 people that are your type, Doug. And I'm like, oh, look, that's Doug. See, you're different than any one of the ones I ever met before. See, and that's what happens with type. It does the opposite of what you would think it would do. You don't have to believe me. Find out about types. You'll find out. Anyhow, this is the emoji for my type. See? You know, because I'm like a genie. I look like one, right? So that's me. We have emojis that we have a woman creating for all the types. Isn't that great? Her name's Katie. She's brilliant. Yeah. And so that's it. Those are all the different. Those are some of the different categories that we have with types. So I don't know. Do you want to know anything about it? I mean, I may not know. I mean, but they'll probably know better. Yeah. Anything you want to know about types?
Can you tell us what types we are just looking at us? Do you?
It's much worse than you're imagining.
It's much worse.
Worse. Much.
What do you mean by worse?
So let me give you a sense of what it means. When you go to med school and let's say you learn how to do an IV, all you see is people's blood. All you see. And or you learn about, so when you learn stuff, then you see it in people. And that knowledge is like, it's heavy.
This is what it's like for me. Anywhere I go, the moment I meet somebody, in a part of a second, I already know their genetic type. But I have a blue-green bionic readout over here with 40 high and low traits, and I start checking them off. I can't help it. I don't oftentimes type people at all. People are like, what type's that person? I'm like, I have no idea. They're like, you didn't type them? I'm like, no. I'm trying to handle my feelings of attraction to the person, and I'm trying to mature emotionally in the situation. And so then I tell the person, you have really nice hair. And the person says, thanks. And their response to my attachment is what emotionally changes my hormones to mature me. So now instead of jumping their bones, I want to go to the movies with them. But your emotional maturity is based on their response. So you'll see, anywhere I go and I see somebody and I find something attractive about them, I'm like, those are great blue jeans. And they're like, oh, thanks, dude. And then it's like, boom. And then I mature emotionally. Because you can't mature your thinking by yourself, you put it out there. And you can't mature your emotionality by yourself. It only comes by attaching to other people. So it's much worse. I'll give you an example. Do you know who Ariel Ford is? Ariel Ford?
No.
Okay, well, she's the PR person behind Deepak Chopra. Anyhow, she wanted to represent me, so I went to her house and I stretched her. And then she brings me back in the house to meet her husband, who's really a fabulous person. And she goes, hey, Bruce, meet God. And I was like, Ariel, stop misbehaving. Don't do that. And she goes, he knows something about stretching you don't know. And he goes, oh, I like my yoga. I'm not done. I could have left it alone. And I go to him, hey, I smell mold coming from the basement. Did you all have water damage? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, can we go downstairs? I want to check it out. We go downstairs and he goes, we had water damage, but we got it fixed. I go, no, it went up into the walls. You didn't remove the drywall? He goes, no. I go, you got black mold behind though. I got a really good sense of smell. Not as good as some other people in the room. I was like, you got black mold in there. He goes, oh my God, thank you very much. No problem. Everything's a setup. You have to understand with me, most things are a setup. I'm trying to get satisfaction like everybody else, but I got more tools. They got tools I don't have, and I'm trying to get their tools, right? And he goes to walk up the steps, and I trip him. And as he falls down the step, he goes to kick me. And as he's kicking down to kick against me, I lift up his leg and I go, that's how you stretch. You have to contract the muscle when you stretch your hamstring. And then I walk over him and go back upstairs. I was like, I'm satisfied now. See? That's how that works. In other words, I'm not afraid to go into conflict if I want something and if it doesn't harm the person. And that's what it's kind of like. Or I'm in the grocery store and some guy's got a back brace on his back and it's in Massachusetts. And I lie down on the ground and I go, oh man, dude, I've been in the car for hours and my lower back's killing me. And so if I stretch out my lateral hamstring, actually I could take the tension out of my back. Oh, do you have any raw milk here? And he goes, sir, we can't sell raw milk in Boston. I said, I live in California. We can. Oh, God, it's tighter on the other leg, I can tell. Oh, shit. I thought that was bad enough on that side. Oh, okay. Oh, this is better. Oh, my back's feeling better now. Well, couldn't I get raw milk here? And he goes, oh, sir, you can't do that. Has nothing to. I know they don't have raw milk in Massachusetts. I'm trying to help the guy out of his lower back. I was like, oh, thanks a lot. That's what I'm like. I misbehave everywhere I go. That's what you get to do.
What would be your highest wish for us with the information that you just shared?
It would be for you to know that the high trait of my type is wish fulfilling. Funny that you choose that choice of words, because your type has a psychological insight on other people that allows you to identify their high traits, but you don't know you do. So wishing is my high trait. I look at people and all I want to do is fulfill their wishes. Isn't that what she did with the food? Didn't she want people to have what they wished for food? She knows how to do it with food. I can do it with things also. That's what I like to do. Other people are doing equivalent things.
So say that again. So you would wish for us that with this information that you just said, thank you for being so generous with this, Bob. What is your highest wish for us having shared this with us?
I already answered the question because I consider it more personal for you, quite frankly. Otherwise, I consider it martyrdom. But anyhow, the answer to the question is some guy was doing a documentary one day and was filming me for something. He was filming me. And he said, hey, Bob, what do you think the purpose of life is? And I go, you're asking me? The purpose of, why don't you go talk to somebody that knows about that? He goes, no, really, what do you think? And I go, are you kidding? Look around. The plants are incredible. The animals are incredible. The food's extraordinary. There's all these amazing people around. The only thing to do is have a good time. Why don't you just have a great time? And then if you want to do something else, take the plastic out of the ocean or whatever, you're too bored. But just make sure you really enjoy it. This is an unusual planet. It's not Mars. Like if I was you, I'd really enjoy yourself. Like make it really good for you. Because if you make it good for you, it's going to be good for everybody else. So that's what I think myself personally. But individually for each person, it's a different ballgame. Like I go after the person individually to try to help them out that way. So isn't that in line somewhat with what you were talking about? Only I'm showing you that we have tools to do that. Mm-hmm. So if you're in a business meeting with people and people are not being generous, we know exactly how to get them to be generous, right? Because what they don't get is that they don't know that they got to be not generous. They got to really like being not generous. And if they can transmute that, it turns into generosity, right? So I encourage them to be more stingy. And I really push that really far, and then it takes it into the other, right? Otherwise, you get even more stingy. Or greed. In America, it's called greed, right? Yeah. You must know that I had no interest in ever developing this information. I mean, I was just trying to get my body back from my accident, and I ran into this information. So I put a board on the wall, I put a white thing on the wall, like the size of that thing, smaller. And anytime I'd stretch a muscle, I'd be like, oh, well, my self-worth is increasing. I'm a very psychological. Oh, my self-worth is increasing with this muscle. Then I would write it on the chart for that particular thing. And after a while, that's an eccentric way of doing things, by the way. And after a while, I didn't do that. I just put, at the time, 14 folders on the wall. And anytime anybody in the room started identifying things about the types, I just put it in there. And then it became the database for the types. I mean, I did some other work on the side. Yeah. Okay. I think they appear different than other people, Doug, because of the information and because we're very community-based. And so we're there to help each other as much as we can. And the priority of the studio is not the clients. It's the trainers. Because if they're not developed, they can't help you. I mean, we work with some very unusual people, average people like myself, or really destroyed people physiologically or physically and stuff like that. But we also work with people that don't need to meet another person. They've already met too many people. And so if they're going to help work with that person, they got to be offering something, the average person doesn't offer them. Even if they're skilled at what they're doing, they got to be more than just skilled at that. And so they can be with people in a way other people can't be. And so it works. But the priority is really them. And then the other people are helping in the process. It's a very different model. We don't have I essentially support the studio. And the trainers give very little money to the studio. So it's essentially based on developing them. And it's worth it. You can see how satisfied Doug said to me, you must feel very satisfied with the way Tomas and Eric are behaving. And I said, I find them complete juvenile delinquents. No, I'm just kidding. No, I told him that I do very much, it makes me cry. I'm very proud, right? It's really great for me. I'm really happy about how they get to be, right? Because they're normal. I don't like any of that. I had a woman come to me recently, she goes, I've developed all the high 16 types of your type. I was like, oh my God, it's a lunatic. I'm dealing with a lunatic, right? So they're not like that. Okay, so did you learn something about it? Did that help you at all? Or? It changes you to know. There is a problem with knowing types. It's an idea that doesn't stop. It takes everything in its path. In other words, when an idea is good, it's not a trend. It takes you. And that's what the type idea is like. Once you tell people about types, they never forget about types. It's a weird thing. What did you want to say?
It's being absurd.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, it's a joke. Okay,
see, they're being bad again. They're so bad compared to me. It's just unbelievable. I don't know how to be as bad as them. That's why I hang out with them. They have so much more fun than I have this way. Anyhow, so that's the stuff about types.
All right,
so I'm glad we got to tell everybody.
You're the philosopher. Let's hear some questions here.
Oh my God.
I can help you out. The only book I read before college was Winnie the Pooh. I faked all the book reports and everything. And then when I went, I'm not kidding. This is me. And then when I went to school, I took a course. I went to Adelphi University my second year, and I took a course in educational philosophy. You couldn't get me out of the library. I couldn't stop reading. And then I started devouring the database on educational psychology. And professors started to run courses for me, just for me, because I'd already read all the stuff in a normal course. You couldn't get me out of there. So when I applied for grad school, I got a very low grade on the English part because my database was philosophy and psychology and biomechanical analysis. So I scored really low in the English, but very high in the math part. So in terms of philosophy, it's housed in the kidneys, this muscle group in here. If we want to develop the philosophy for people, we just stimulate their kidneys. That means it requires a really good sense of humor to be philosophical. See, she smiles because she knows that already.
I think that's true.
That's true, right?
Yeah.
I think so
Agree
too.
with that?
Yeah.
I mean, philosophy's not one thing.
It's not one thing.
No. It's a lot of things. I like your approach to it.
So do you feel better about it? Don't feel so boxed in, or you feel more boxed?
No, I find it all very fascinating. And I don't think I was referring to boxing. I think that people evolve and change.
They do.
And so...
But we can't get them out of the type, unfortunately.
I know, but I was just going to say about extrovert and introvert,
Let's answer that question, okay?
Yeah.
This dumb thing they have in psychology now, the 5 most dumb. You have to have an IQ in the 3rd grade or something. It's just so, it's so far behind. People are born an introvert or an extrovert, but then they balance to do the other one. So based in terms of the genetics, we know people are born either an introvert or an extrovert. They're either born self-centered or other-centered. They're born either arm or leg dominant, and they're born either yin or yang. And if you combine those 4 pairs, you get 16 types, and it's not Myers-Briggs. I mean, Jung was good with the types, but the people after them, they developed something that's for sale. You know, it doesn't really work. I'm sure it could be helpful. It's not, it doesn't hold water. It doesn't have a physical basis. If you want reality, you have to have a physical basis. So I do agree that you were born an extrovert and have developed more introvert traits. I completely agree. You think so too? And do you think you think I was born an introvert or an extrovert?
I think you were born an introvert.
Correct.
And then
And then I have to do a little of this, which I'm terrible at, right? Okay.
Yeah, so that was my whole thing. We didn't finish. I was just thinking, I think we evolve when we change. We were something, and then...
It's called transmute. You transcend.
Yeah.
You don't lose
and
the
more
other.
knowledge you know that you can change, you know. And
So I have a question. Do you think you're other-centered or self-centered?
I think I'm probably both.
Everybody's both of everything, of course.
But yeah, I think maybe other-centered.
I totally agree. And so because when you meet somebody your type, it's just like, let me love you, let me love you, let me love you. And when they do that to me, it's not what I need. So I'm like, don't do more of that. I don't really need that. Can we try something else?
Yeah.
Because the type that balances you loves themselves.
Yeah.
And so that's a good switch. So inside of you is a man that knows how to love themselves, but doesn't know how to love others. And so see, then as you become more balanced, you turn inside out and you become more like that type on the inside. And so then you become more self-centered instead of other-centered. Now America thinks other-centered is better than self-centered. I mean, that's hogwash. So if you're other-centered, you have to do enough of that so that you can learn how to do things for yourself, to be self-centered, right? And if you're self-centered, you got to get satisfied enough before you feel like extending out and knowing how to help other people or how to be other. So don't give people a hard time about being self-centered or other-centered.
Yeah.
They're making their way towards balance. You know, everything balances.
Well, that's...
So one of the things I think is great about the type concept is that it does take away an absolute moral judgment of one way of being or one way of thinking. Or
it's not taking sides, right?
Exactly. And we've talked a little bit about that before, is that chemistry then becomes very, very interesting. And, you know, how different ideas relate to each other, emotions, and it takes away that by removing one concept, it's very relieving to the individual.
See, that way you don't get into trouble with people. Because if say they're very self-centered, then you reinforce their self-centeredness and tell them how good it is. Because in America, you think you're terrible if you're self-centered. And instead, you got to get them to validate that it's a great way to be. And then you start helping them to understand. You can do it by stretching a certain muscle group in them to make them other-centered. Your muscle group associated with the skin. They call the skin triple heater in Chinese medicine because they didn't know the skin was an organ. They thought the organs were all inside. Oh, interesting, right? So you just reinforce that person in the real way they're being that way, and then you let them know how that gets them the knowledge they need to do the other, and then they don't feel bad about themselves, right? That's what I try to do all the time, assuming I'm not malfunctioning and being, you know, the bad side of Bob or whatever. But, yeah.
I guess what I find kind of puzzling is this relationship between, you know, muscles and personality. So, I mean, just being forced to ask a philosophical type question here. You know, I guess I'm just not really understanding. So your theory is mainly just based on what you've observed, right? But have you observed it like in enough people to think that it's really definitely a causal effect between, say, stretching something and having a different personality type?
You're going to hate the answer. You're just going to hate the answer.
Not necessarily, because I'm not myself devoted to philosophical.
I have a really good friend of mine, and she said she wanted me to type her husband. And I said, well, that's up to him, that's not up to you. And so he gets on the YouTube, he gets on the Zoom. And I said, your wife wants to know what type you are. Do you know what type you are? And he goes, well, she wants me to. And I said, well, I don't think that's fair. I think you need to know. If you want to know, then otherwise, I think it's a personal matter myself. And he goes, okay, like what type am I? And I told him high traits about himself, and he goes, I am like that, but where's the proof? I said, no problem. My type likes to speculate, and I know your type likes proofs.
I don't like proofs.
Well, I'm just saying she does, but she doesn't admit it. But anyhow, I get to decide myself. But anyhow, so she gets to decide, but so do I, right? And so I said to him, if you give me some research, I need about 60 grand, and I can prove that there's an association between a muscle group and a personality type. I said, but I don't want to do that. I'd rather spend the 60 on something else. But if you want to know proof about that, we just need some research money, and we can do that. He still hates me to this day. Okay? He was the person that did the documentary on Bob Ramdas. So the answer to the question is, the quantification of that, for me personally, after knowing 10, I'm a different type than you. So my type, it's funny to use the word puzzle, because my brand of thinking is puzzling. So if you give me a puzzle and you turn over the pieces on the table, I can pick, my attention goes to 2 of the pieces, and when I put them together, I can tell you what the picture is. I don't need many facts. But I know other people like a lot of facts, and some people like to prove facts, and some people like to ruminate about them. I'm not particularly interested in those ways. Other people can do that. I just need a couple facts and I'm off and running.
So, I mean, it's interesting because I think, like, when you look at, like, philosophy of the mind and, the thinkers, in previous epics, they were looking, the proof was inside them.
Right.
And it's only, and we now, in today's era, discount that. And so it's interesting, I think it is very interesting to all of a sudden resurrect that as, the purity of observation that you have of yourself being a valid form of proof.
It's worse than you're imagining. Anybody that you put in a particular stretch uses the same words to describe the way they feel.
But couldn't you just...
Not me, them, anybody, any muscle group, they use the same words. So the words that I use, for, like an example?
Yeah.
Oh, so if you stretch the lateral quad, everybody goes, this is so much work to stretch my lateral quad. And when they stretch the inside leg, they're like, oh, this is fun. And different muscle groups are like that. Without any education, they come out with it. Because the database on types is a universal language coming out of the body. It wasn't thought up. It comes out of the body instead.
Well, I just think it's interesting because, the sort of older forms of philosophy, when you look at Descartes, they thought that the mind and the body were completely separate. And the most recent forms of that kind of thinking have taken the opposite turn. And so there's this whole thing about neural correlates of consciousness. So, that there's something going on that you can actually associate with different thoughts and feelings, but most people place that in the brain. And I actually like the idea that you place it more in the body.
Yeah, that there's 16 brains, not just one brain, not just this one, or the more powerful one in the groin, but there's 14 other ones besides that. Yeah. Because, wait a minute, did you know that, have you heard about the heart transplants or organ transplants? They take somebody's heart, and the guy was a serial killer or antisocial behavior. You don't know this? No. It's a science thing. There's a book on it. And they transplant the heart, and the guy's now antisocial. The guy now wants to rob banks and stuff.
It's the Peter Lorre film.
Okay.
The Hand,
Oh, I don't know that. Okay.
It's one of the first horror movies where he loses his hands, and they transplant onto him the hands of a murderer, and the hands just can't wait to go.
Yeah. The biggest problem, the biggest problem for me is that I had no trouble with the fact that he slapped the guy at the Academy Awards. And why? Because he'd done the most successful film that he wanted to do his whole life, and now he's in a total borderline state because nobody's protecting him, his wife, and none of the people around him. So he's going to act out borderline. That's what's about. I think it's a bad thing.
He was doing it to get clear.
Well, it didn't really work.
No,
But there's a better way to do it. You know what I mean? But I can understand how that behavior would come out of a person. See what I mean that way? And so I felt bad about that for him. I felt bad for Steve Jobs and got to get to him because I knew he was killing himself by not eating food. Too much fruit. If you eat too much fruit, you're going to create pancreatic cancer. It's stupid.
Nice.
So I don't allow the people that work with us in the studio to go off the deep end. That's not happening. You know what I mean? Like, hey, the person you're dating is a psychopath. Did you want to know about it? You know, or whatever. So we try to help the people out this way.
We have to have
All
like a
right,
911.
we should wrap up, but thank you.
It's called Call Bob. It's the Bob app. Okay, so we did a little. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for everything.